Mm.
All right.
That was
Welcome to the
awesome.
movie potluck. That was great. Um I'm going to start out the show by saying it's been a really long hard week for the whole world, really. And I preface the show by saying that because I feel very, very happy to be here and to be talking about the things that we're going to talk about tonight when I know that there is so much happening around the world, both here at home in Texas, in Ukraine, just everywhere. And I just wanted to say I really appreciate the fact that we can take this hour or a little bit more and just be sort of in this moment, enjoying movies, enjoying the company that we all have with each other. It really makes me feel awesome. And I hope that we contribute a little bit of that to everybody that listens. So thank you for that. Um, uh, so the intro that just played made me remember something, and that is the the line between what we read in books and what we see in movies is this very thin one that is such an interesting place to kind of be in the middle of when we imagine what we think of inside of a book in terms of a story, and then we watch what happens as movie magic happens all around us, and we see then the product of someone's imagination bringing that forward. It's kind of amazing. It's amazing that we have the ability to basically, don't, please forgive me, live action role play our stories into being on film. It's just absolutely spectacular. And the reason that I chose classic literature for one of our topics is classic literature in particular, we seem to treat differently. We treat it more special, we treat it with more importance, we give it a kind of credibility that we don't give other stories. Now, that's not to say that a movie like the Taming of the Shrew, story, I'm sorry, of the Taming of the Shrew hasn't been done countless times in different episodic cycles or as a part of a movie trope. It absolutely has been. But it's interesting to me that when we look at classic literature, the way that we try to tell those stories is more authentic, more genuine, more true to the absolute narrative that happens instead of mixing it up quite so much. Although we're going to get into some of the other ideas that people have around classic literature later. Um, I wanted to start out the show in terms of like what we are going to talk about tonight by defining a little bit about what I think our classic literature cutoffs are, right? Because I did put To Kill a Mockingbird on our list, and To Kill a Mockingbird was actually only written not that long ago. It's not like it was, written in the 1800s. Um what makes classic literature to me is sort of an instant um, set of rules and ideas around how we perceive the literature itself. So, classic literature goes on to be something that we then say everybody should read this because it sort of espouses the universal ideas of being human, of the state of the human condition. And uh, I suppose, when I was looking up sort of like what are classic definitions of classic literature, it's really all over the place. There's a lot of interesting ideas about what doesn't make classic literature, but I can't really pin down one specific definition for classic literature that fits and ticks all the boxes. So, if you hear something in our list today that doesn't sound like classic literature, sound off and tell us why you think it's not, or why you think something should be included. So, I'm going to first introduce my panel tonight, and then we're going to start talking about some shows. First is Tori. Tori, how are you tonight?
I'm wonderful. I'm excited about this show because I love classic literature.
Very awesome. Notably, we're missing Betty tonight. Betty is overseas having some crazy adventure, probably with some Highlander type people. I don't know, but we do know that she's in Scotland. We hope that she's having a great time, Betty. We love you. Um, and tonight we have Josh. Josh, how are you tonight?
Coming down from behind the rafters.
Yes, we don't get to see Josh very often. He's usually the one that's pulling up all of our awesome movie pieces and putting together our intros, and but trust me, I know he's got a lot to say. Right, Josh?
I
You got
got
a
a
lot to say, right?
noggin. I might be able to use it on a Thursday.
I'm hoping. I'm seriously hoping.
We'll see what happens. Fingers crossed.
Okay, so I am going to ask you guys a question right out of the gate. I'm going to ask you, what movie have you seen as a kid or as an adult that changed the way you thought about a piece of literature? So, I'll give you an example. For me, um I have read Hamlet probably, I don't know, so many times, easily 100 times. I love Hamlet. And then I saw Hamlet done with Glenn Close and was it who was it? It wasn't Russell Crowe. Uh who was it? I forgot. But anyway, it was Glenn Close was in it. And it changed the way that I thought about Hamlet altogether because I hadn't taken into consideration a lot of the more disturbing backstory. And I know that that sounds ridiculous because that's basically what Hamlet is. It's terrible stuff happening, terrible secret family things that come to light, and I mean it's really a dark story. Um but when they narrated it, when they created the story for Hamlet for the movie, they chose to pay attention to some of the relationships that Hamlet had that I hadn't actually given a lot of thought to. And I felt like that really changed the way that I thought about the story altogether. So I'm going to ask you guys the same thing. Although it's not classic, well, no, actually, it is classic literature, I guess. I felt also the same way about Dorian Gray. I saw three movies that were the picture of Dorian Gray at one point. They were on these back to back episodic movie day things. And I had read Dorian Gray before, and I had never really given a lot of serious thought to Dorian Gray being the tortured kind of hero that he was in his own mind. Like, it always felt to me like Dorian Gray was more cut and dry than it actually was when I saw it in movies. So that's another one. So tell me, Tori, what movie have you seen that changed your mind about a piece of fiction that was classic literature?
It would have to be Catcher in the Rye.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
why?
I loved the story. Maybe it's because I'm a misfit, but honestly, like he was out on his own, doing his own shit, getting hookers. Like it was such a great story, and it was kind of like before the times, you know, like They
Right.
didn't have anything like that whenever this story came out, you know? So it was interesting to see the dark side of, I think, what year was it made? What year
Um
was it? What year
well
did it come out?
Catcher in the Rye that the year of the story isn't the year the story took place, right?
Right.
Because I think I want to say J.D. Salinger actually wrote Catcher in the Rye in the 50s, at
Okay.
maybe the early 50s. But isn't but I feel like the Catcher in the Rye takes place at a different time.
Yeah, I think so too. I want to say like in the 30s or 40s. I really want to say like it was the 40s. Like I don't know why I'm gravitating toward that time period, but just by what he had to do to get on the train and all that shit. Like
That's right.
like I felt like it was more like the 40s, maybe early 50s. But the point is like it was not none of their story or book around that time period was like that.
Right,
It
right.
was like first of its kind. So I really like that part of it.
I love the fact that Catcher in the Rye, that in the story, it's difficult if you've never been to New York City. It's difficult to sort of imagine some of the bigger reasons that some of the iconic places in the book matter, and in the movie they really make them fit exactly the way they're supposed to. Like the Metropolitan Museum and Central Park, the zoo, and even the carousel. It just there's a lot of really good things in. Also, that story, that J.D. Salinger's story is so that story to me is so young adult sad, that I feel like everybody who's ever been a challenged teenager has read that and identified with it. I don't know why, but seems like a lot of people have. All right,
Yeah.
Josh, same question to you.
Well, my answer is going to be a little bit of a cop out because it is going to be anything that has the name Sherlock Holmes attached to it.
Oh, okay.
Because
Tell us
every
why.
take, probably because it's an IP that's in the public domain, and it opens the door for a lot of people to have different interpretations of Conan Doyle's work. And every time I see a new interpretation, doesn't matter if it's something as serious as the Cumberbatch series,
Mm,
or the comedies, or the action adventures, like with Robert Downey Jr. They each add another element to Holmes and Watson, and especially their dynamic, how their
Hmm.
relationship plays out. Sometimes it's really refreshing to see certain takes on how close they are, and other times it's a little eye opening to see that maybe there are times when their relationship might have been a bit on the unhealthy side.
mm.
Yeah. They're
I
very
wasn't.
codependent. Codependent would be a
That's a
great
good.
word.
Yeah, that's a good word, actually. I wasn't going to talk about this until a little bit later, but let's open this up. One of my favorite adaptations of Sherlock Holmes, from the kids' perspective, is The Great Mouse Detective,
Mm.
because they make the story, it's clearly a Sherlock Holmes story, but they make the story very light and different than a standard Sherlock Holmes, although all the elements of solving a Sherlock mystery are there. um I feel really similar to the way that you feel, Josh, about Agatha Christie novels. I have never seen two instances of a telling of Murder on the Orient Express that are the same. They're always different in some, and you can't mess up the story. The story is the story is the story. But the way that they tell it always surprises me in some small way, and to me that is actually the I think the hallmark of a good piece of literature. You can look at it from a thousand different ways and come up with the same narrative. You don't have to change the narrative in order to make some really interesting character choices, or paying attention to different things at different times. Also, I before I forget, it finally came to me who played Hamlet. It was Mel Gibson
Oh
as
yeah.
as a
Yep.
baby. God, he was so young back then.
Hmm.
Uh, I guess we all were. Um, so okay, so along those same lines, then same question, different question, but along the same things. What is a classic literature story that you remember recognizing in a movie, even though the movie wasn't necessarily that movie? So, like like I was saying in the beginning, Taming of the Shrew is like a through line in so many different movies. Um, Classic Romeo and Juliet stories are everywhere. West Side Story is a Romeo and Juliet story. That kind of thing. So do either of you have a favorite of that kind of movie?
Absolutely.
All right, tell us, Josh.
You mentioned the origin material already, and it's 10 Things I Hate About You.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, it's one of those teen comedies, but when it came out, I was, right at the target demographic, and I watched it so many times.
Yeah, me too. I love Heath Ledger.
Got Heath Ledger, JGL, right? And I guess I'm I'll get her name, Julie
Julia Stiles.
Julia Stiles. That's it. And what's her face from Alex Mack?
Um, yeah. Oh God, what's her name? I don't remember her name.
Did it change for you how you were able to see the piece of literature in it? Like did you feel a closer connection to the literature itself?
Yeah, I it's like I finally got it because it was put in a way that was relatable to me.
Yeah, that I it's funny because I actually hear that a lot. I hear whenever I tell somebody that okay, this is the and I try not to use this too often because I feel like there's a huge difference between something taking on a true adaptation and then just simply being a trope of, right? Because being a trope of something is definitely not the complicated version of, hey, this is actually an adaptation of. And I'm going to use an example here in a second. um but I'm curious, Tori, do you have any, have there been any instances for you in that way?
Well, I want to say like She's All That was a retold story. I don't really remember the origin story of it, but I know it was like maybe a Cinderella story. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so she was, the ugly duckling, and then she got made over, and then everybody loved her. I guess it would be like the ugly duckling kind of thing.
And so let me ask this in a slightly different way then, because
Okay.
again, because I think that there is classic literature has a way of worming its way into our stories, our currently told stories, in all kinds of different ways, that we might not recognize. And it tends to be little mentions here and there. And then all of a sudden you'll see something and you'll say, oh, no, wait a minute. I recognize this plot as being the plot from, and then whatever it is. And I think what I'm more trying to understand is, do you think that there, like, are there really good instances of movies out there that play that role, that play the role of teaching us about classic literature without necessarily being the classic literature itself? I mean, listen, I have told many people about Anna Karenina and their eyes glaze over and they go, oh god, not that. And it's actually a really excellent story. And sometimes I think that if we just picked that story up and told it a little bit differently,
Yeah.
um, all of a sudden we would get more people interested. I mean, I kind of feel that same very way about Anastasia as the
Yeah.
Disney story. It has so many elements of classic literature in it, and yet it's kind of a brand new story. But anyway,
Mhm.
that's what I was thinking.
Okay, so Well, let's see. Hmm. What about like Aladdin?
Oh, that's a good one.
Because it was made by Disney and it was a book, it was back in the day. I remember like reading it. So,
So, so do you think that okay, so I'll ask it this way then. So do you think that watching Aladdin gave you a better understanding of the compilation of the tales Arabian Nights?
yes, absolutely. Like it made me interested to read more about the desert and,
Hmm.
you know, m- the desert dwelling people. Like I don't want
Okay.
to I
Well,
don't want to like
Alibaba had his 40 thieves.
yeah, yeah, that too.
I have a good one for you guys. All right. So every kid, and again, Hamlet is my favorite, or one of my favorites anyway. Um,
You're going to say
every
it.
kid has seen The Lion King.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
And but not every kid recognizes that The Lion King is a Hamlet story. That is where I think sometimes we can make good stories even more accessible because we change up the dynamic of the narrative, but the story itself remains intact.
Right.
um and okay, and then there are some movies or some stories that we can't do that with. Um and I'm going to mention one here and tell me what you think about it and tell me how you think we could ever remake this. To Kill a Mockingbird.
Mm,
It's a really hard piece of first of all, it's a hard piece of literature to absorb, right? And
right.
I don't know about you guys, but when I read To Kill a Mockingbird, absolutely positively identified with Scout in every single way. I felt like I was Scout. Um, and to experience the world as Scout was experiencing the world gave me a different appreciation for some grown up themes that I probably wouldn't have even ti dipped my toe into. But the book gave me a lot of that. Now, after we read the book, we saw the movie, the black and white with Gregory Peck. It that movie changed how I saw the book too. It not so much because it was different, but because I understood the gravity of things in a way that I didn't understand the gravity of them before. So okay, so I have to ask. So what are some classic literature movies that have been built from classic literature that you do not ever want to see remade? What about you,
Hmm.
Josh?
Movies based on classic literature that I do not want to see remade.
Right, like they were made in a particular movie, you don't want to see it remade. That movie is the pinnacle. Even if they have been remade already, you like the pinnacle and that's it.
Hmm. That is quite the toughie, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
Is
She's
okay,
it?
known for this. She's known for this.
I'll, I'll, I'm going to give you an answer though,
All right. What
because
is it?
we are incredibly, incredibly saturated with this particular plot line. I think it's time to hang it up because it's been done well repeatedly. No more Romeo and Juliet stories.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We've seen it
Uh,
done in every genre, every motif, all of it sci fi, uh, musical, animation. It's been done to death. We had a version with shootouts and car chases. We're
yeah,
good.
good point. Good point.
Mhm.
We're good.
Okay. What about you, Tori?
Okay, so this is a hard one, but A Christmas Carol.
Oh,
I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. Like
I'm I'm sorry, Tori, we cannot be friends anymore.
No, no, I love it. I love this story. Okay, don't get me wrong. I love this story and I love all the movies. And some of them are so good that I don't think that remaking it now would make it any better.
Okay, I was gonna wait to tell you guys this a little bit later, but I'm gonna tell you this now. A couple years ago, I wrote this essay for one of my blogs about why I thought A Christmas Carol slash Scrooge is such an excellent story to tell and retell and tell and retell. And okay, now this is what I did. In order to understand this, I, in over the course of a year, collected every single A Christmas Carol story that I could find, every single one that had been made into a movie. And I had no idea that there were so many. I mean, there are so many. And I diligently watched them all. And I came away with some favorites. I did. But to me, A Christmas Carol is a little bit like a King Arthur story. It changes depending upon how we see ourselves in socioeconomic favor, whether we see ourselves as much more downtrodden than we are at other times, or how we see rich in general, how the rich and miserly are, and whether we believe in at any moment real paths to redemption and what that looks like. What is real redemption? And that's really the story of Scrooge, right? Is
Yeah,
how does he find redemption? Okay. And so
I mean,
th-
I agree
which
with
is not
you. I
right,
agree with
right.
you.
Which is not to say, because I was just going to say, to your point, I agree in some ways that the that the storyline of Scrooge gets all over the place. It's everywhere. But I also think that as a piece of classic literature, there are few, but as a piece of classic literature, that's one that I can watch over and over and over again. However, if you were I'll tell you one that I think works, but then every time it gets retold, I feel like they fail it in just horrible ways. The Count of Monte Cristo,
Oh yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
such an awesome
I've thought about
story.
that. I thought about that one, but
It's an excellent story. It's so amazing, and it's got a real moral center to be told. And every time we retell that story, we skip the morality of it. We skip the real, well, why was he, what was the problem with what was happening? And the whole, all of the prison scenes matter. There's all of that, and we tend to sort of like skip over a lot of that stuff and go, well, that, okay, we'll just tell the story before and then after and then just a little bit in between. And that always drives me crazy. So that's the kind of thing that I think I was thinking about. I'll say one thing. Um, Robert Louis Stevens and his Treasure Island, I think, launched every pirate movie
yeah.
that we basically have now. And I don't mean the pirates speak, but the idea of the pirate.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. Yep.
it's not the story, because the story was the story, and I feel like we've had lots of stories about pirates, but the movie Treasure Island, the original movie of Treasure Island, um set the stage for these really fancy outfits that they were wearing on deck, the just that whole experience. And the search for buried gold, which I mean, I know we love it so much, but I just can't imagine that pirates were out there going, "Yeah, let's dig for buried gold, guys." Because Treasure Island launched Peter Pan,
Yeah. Yeah.
and not so much the Peter Pan story, but the adaptation understanding of what should Peter Pan look like because there were pirates in it, right?
Right.
and things like that. All right, I'm going to throw one out there for you. Tell me what you think. Hunchback of Notre Dame.
I love
Should
it.
we do it as another movie, or should we not do it as another movie? What do you think, Josh?
See, okay.
I don't think that we should be treading in those waters again anytime soon. I have this
And
really weird
tell
policy
me
that
why.
um, that if Disney or the Muppets have done it, chances are it's not going to be done better.
That's true. That
So
is
no more
so true.
so no more Treasure Island at this point because the Muppets already did it. I'm gonna
Yes.
have to
And
I'm
nail
gonna have
and
to call the makers of Black Sails and tell them.
yeah, you might want to. Tim Curry. There's a reason
Yes.
he was in the opening sequence.
Tim Curry.
Man, he really was the best Long John Silver
Tim
ever.
bleeping Curry.
It's true. It's absolutely true. I thought you were going to say something totally different, and I agree with you on this one, but I would have agreed with you too if you had said we just can't seem to do the Hunchback of Notre Dame without being incredibly both
Insensitive?
scarily, yes, yes, scarily, not, we don't even try to hide it, and
Yeah.
that is just I'm astounded. I'm
Hey,
really
everybody, we're
astounded.
laughing at freaks here.
Yes.
And
That's what
no,
it
and
feels
God.
like.
yeah, and okay, and let's juxtapose this. Let's juxtapose this with Phantom of the Opera. And we get Phantom of the Opera that tells a weird, crafty love story and
Yeah.
doesn't go to the sort of ableist, weird places that Hunchback does. But you know, Hunchback really could be the Hunchback of Notre Dame could be an excellent story told through a movie if we would pay attention to the things that are actually important in the story in the classic literature instead of I don't know, trying to make it some kind of I'm not even sure how to say this. A story that fits something that we want to see today instead of being sort of a more true representation of what the story
Okay,
is.
so it's a little dated now, but did you ever see the movie Big Man on Campus?
Yes.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. That was a
Hmm.
modern adaptation of Notre Dame. And that's perfect for me. I loved that movie.
Right.
It was done so well. I think it was.
We've we've had a ton over the past I don't know, maybe 50 years or so of the idea of a Cyrano de Bergerac as well. Now they just made a new Cyrano movie with the um oh my god, I'm so sorry that my brain is on
The
freeze
Dink.
today. Yes,
Uh,
Peter Dinklage. Thank you, thank you. And I am so sad to say that I haven't seen it yet. I do want to see it. Um, and that's another one that sometimes gets told in such, it's like, wow, really, this is the way we're going to tell this story, because it's actually a really good story, and we kind of take it to like really weird extremes. Anyway, I think that there are some classic literature movies that we've made that were pretty faithful to the story itself, and that I just don't think that we need to remake because I feel like we screw it up a little bit. Um, I don't know what that's all about. I don't quite get it. Okay, let's go down the horror chute. Horror. Frankenstein and Dracula. I mentioned Dorian Gray earlier, which also I think technically fits in with this one. We have told and retold Frankenstein stories and Dracula stories so often that I mean, we would have a gigantic list. But I wanted to know from you guys, what do you think is what makes that piece of classic literature so retellable? Is it just our love of sort of supernatural unknown, or is it something that is more along the lines of human, not human, but retains human qualities? Like, where do you find, or what do you find to be compelling in those stories that we keep retelling? Go ahead, Tori.
the fantasy of it. Because people might have thought this in their head. They might have been like, oh, that would be great, and never really gave it a second thought. but like the fairy tales and told stories through the decades. Those are actually classic stories too. They've been made into books and whatnot. There's been tellings of tales since the beginning of time. But I think that uh, honestly, um, the whole aspect of it all is just I don't know.
So more the fantastical, like the idea of could this happen, and then yes, this absolutely could happen.
Yes, and and I think that people put uh peop person like uh features on characters like Dracula
Right.
because they fear something. They
I think that's true.
they that's the fear of people, like that's their dark side. That's
So I have heard often that Dracula, specifically Dracula, and then I'll let you answer, Josh. I have heard that Dracula is like one of the greatest romance stories of all time. That Bram Stoker really captured the longing and the want, and the sort of almost unrequited love, until you get to death.
right.
And I've always found that very fascinating because I absolutely don't really agree, but also because I think, to me, the biggest draw of Dracula is, and it's sort of the same with Frankenstein, is our absolute addiction to wanting immortality as an option. And what we seem to always want on the other side is the reasons not to chase immortality. Why should we not chase immortality? Well, here's the cautionary tale. Dracula. Here's the other cautionary tale. Frankenstein. You could have a technical regrouping of body parts, but would they ever be you? Would
Right.
they ever be, and that to me is actually kind of a fascinating piece. So go ahead, Josh. Tell me, what do you think?
What was the question?
Okay, Frankenstein, Dracula. Why do you think that we retell those stories so much? What's the draw to them? Is it that we are perpetually kind of in love with the monster stories, or is it the monsters are us kind of idea?
All right, I guess there are a couple of schools of thought on this. The first being, like you said, every once in a while people needed to be reminded that we're all monsters.
Hmm.
It's not wrong, you know,
Agreed.
uh, especially with a lot of mob mentalities pervading the internet. Every once in a while, you need kind of that slap in the face that, hey, Frankenstein, we're the mob, we're the bad guys.
Hmm.
So that's one school of thought. The other being, of course, just from an artistic standpoint, there are there's no generation untouched by these stories, and because like with Sherlock Holmes, the IP is so available. There are artists that want to put their fingerprints on these classics and be able to put out their interpretations of something they grew up with. And I can only imagine that in however many years, because who knows what the laws are like these days, we're going to see people really taking stuff from the early 20th century and making it their own as it becomes more widely available, and we'll be able to see, well, I guess we won't be able to see, but future generations will be able to see what constitutes as a timeless classic if it manages to survive.
So that's a really good point. Because I didn't put any Updike on my list. But I did put Steinbeck on my list.
I
And
love the Pearl. I love it.
and I think, in fact, Of Mice and Men is one of my most favorite
Yeah,
Steinbeck stories of all
Likewise.
time. I love that. And I don't. That's one story that I do feel like we can tell and retell and tell and retell, and it's fine because the universal themes that exist in it are, they're hard to mess up. Number one, but number
yeah,
two, that relationship between the two of them is the dynamic that pushes everything forward, and it feels just as real today as it would any other time in history. So I do really like that. But I want to get back to something. It's funny that, to me, classic literature oftentimes espouses this universal human condition, and the retelling or the telling of classic literature through movies, to me, seems sometimes like such a wider palette to paint with than some of the more, I don't want to call them niche or specific, but they feel much more boxed in. And so when I watch, okay, I'll give you an example. When I watch Jane Eyre, and I just watched Jane Eyre recently, the one with Toby Stevens, and I was, first of all, I really like that story because it's such a wicked story. It's the story that really reminds you that there's consequences for your actions. And even if you think that those consequences are small, they can sometimes be enormous. And I also really like that the happy ending is not the happy ending. Like, it's a happy ending, but it's not the one that you would expect. Um, and but the all of the universal themes that are in there, in fact, the term, well, maybe not the term, but popularized by Jane Eyre, is the term gaslighting, right?
mm-hmm.
It's popularized in in that in the fiction because it takes up such a huge part of what he is trying to do to her, and then what the consequences are of that, are pretty big. The other one that I think back on a lot is, Wuthering Heights.
Okay.
And I, you know what? I gotta say, I love Wuthering Heights as a book. I hate Wuthering Heights as a movie. I hate it. And I'll tell you why. I hate it as a movie, and then I'm going to ask you guys what movies you hate, because of course we have to have some of that in here. Um, I hate it as a movie because I never feel like they ever get Heathcliff right. I always feel like they make Heathcliff out to be so terrible. And he, don't get me wrong, he is a terrible character, but they paint him as almost like a caricature of a villain. And I don't feel like that's actually right. It's There's something more to Heathcliff than I think that we see. The other thing that I hate about that movie is I absolutely hate how the movie paints all of the women as drab and dreary. Every time I see Wuthering Heights, every single woman is just so downtrodden in a way that makes me feel like, why am I watching this? This is just so. This is not Wuthering Heights that I read. This is and I don't feel like I've ever seen a good adaptation of it. So I don't know if you all have a good adaptation for Wuthering Heights. Please let me know. But Tori, tell me what is. Throw me some hate. What are some movies that you hate
Mm,
that are derived from classic literature?
jeez. Let's see. Putting me on the spot. Okay. Uh
Other than Romeo and Juliet, because clearly we've got that.
yeah, I kind of don't like the movie like 101 Dalmatians. I don't know if that was a book. I feel like it should be a book. But it was such a puppy like it was a horrible PETA book. Like it was like you know what I mean? Like PETA would go wild on if this really happened. Like this lady is kidnapping puppies to make them into coats. Like
So concept wise, you don't like. You don't
Now
like
I like the
classic
movie.
literature that deals with the abuse of animals.
Right. Now I
Okay.
loved the movie Cruella. That was a great movie. But 101 Dalmatians, it just doesn't sit well with me. Like I liked it as a kid, but now that I know what it's about, I'm like, oh my god, I don't want to watch that again.
All right, Josh, what do you think? You got any hate for us?
Are we talking direct adaptions or
Yeah.
kind
Well,
of
it could be direct adaptations, or it could just be hey derived from Listen, I can't stand Page Master because they did such a bad job with Jekyll and Hyde. No, that's not true, but just saying.
Oh no,
Example
that was a
wise,
great story.
okay, if we're
that was.
talking adaptations, yeah, I said the word right. Then and I'm proud of myself for being able to do that.
Good job.
Then I'm gonna say Hollow Man.
Okay. Yeah, I can
Based on
see
the
that.
Invisible Man ish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was just a very, very bad movie, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um, all I can say is, how do you have full frontal invisibility? What?
What?
Full frontal invisibility.
Yeah, he's naked and you can see everything, even
Yeah.
though he's invisible because of water. Weird.
Uh, I also actually hate that movie for one other reason. If the first thing that you think of to do with invisibility is go and rape your partner, to me there's something really screwed up about that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But also, I found zero redemption in any of those characters, even the ones that I think I was supposed to root for. I felt like none of them had very strong redemptive arcs or any arcs really altogether. Yeah, I didn't like that movie. Yeah, The Invisible Man is actually a really good story, and he
Hmm.
suffers. I mean, he really suffers.
Hmm.
And I feel like that, but he suffers as a human, right? He's not. I feel like Hollow Man tried to make him into like a super creature, like
A monster.
like yeah, well, yeah, or like he was a like something that should come from Marvel, but didn't go through any of the vetting steps to be there. It's just yeah, no,
You know
I
who
think
did
yeah,
that
that's a
story
good one.
really well?
Who?
Memoirs of an Invisible Man.
Memoirs of an Invisible Man. Actually, just the Invisible Man whole sort of franchise, except for the most recent, which I again absolutely despise. I hated that movie with a passion. But all the other Invisible Man movies, um, actually really like, despite the fact that they're really silly and hokey and
Hmm.
special effects don't you know, but they work on a human level. So I really liked them. Um, okay. I want to skip ahead a little bit to some movies like Beowulf. Um, so maybe not classic literature because Beowulf is obviously written off of an epic. But movies that movies that are like Beowulf with these like really long reaching, we've been telling them forever and ever. Listen, I have seen so many movies that have Gilgamesh as sort of like a bit of a backdrop, not quite telling the Gilgamesh story, but little pieces of it. That like that it's just a pervasive theme over and over again. And yet, I find it interesting, and I'm asking you guys what you think about this. Um, how do you think that that as we tell those stories and sort of modernize them, do you think that it changes them a lot, or do you think that we still sort of understand? I mean, I feel like I understand who Grendel was. I feel like I understand, even if they tell it to make Grendel more or less sympathetic. Like I still get the basics of what was going on. But then there's some stories that I wonder if we sort of like mess up a little bit. Like, what do you think,
Yeah, I
Josh?
mean, I
Oh,
think
go ahead, Dre.
I think that that's true. We mess some things up, but that's the storytelling, right?
Mhm.
Because
It's
one
true.
person can tell a great story, and then the one person that heard them could tell a great story, but it doesn't have all the information because he forgot it. And that's because he didn't write it down, and then they started writing it down, and then one person's like, "Well, I think that my version would be better." So and then you
Right.
have the screenplay world where you read everybody has a screenplay, and then like it gets made maybe, and then the story's Hollywoodized, that so yeah, I agree that there's things that may be different in a classic story.
Well, I think Josh, I think it was Josh that said that, and I agree with him, that we writers, and I include myself in on this, although this is, I struggle with this too. Um, Writers want to put their mark on classic stories. So
Yeah.
I have told several times, I have written short stories that were Homerish, that were Odyssey-ish, right? That really kind of had the whole okay, well, what how do I tell a story like this and give it my own take? But but the the I guess I shouldn't say it's the problem with it, but the issue arises when I think the hubris of the writer rises above the literature itself, in this idea that you could somehow write it better. It's fine to adapt it so that a modern audience can get it or see things that they would identify with. But it's real hubris to say, well, I could tell Frankenstein better than Mary Shelley. And that's where I think we kind of run into movies that have like
Mhm.
these sort of ridiculous idea. And as much as I love,
Hansel and Gretel is a perfect example of that.
yes, and okay, and you know what else is a great example, although I love him dearly, because I say this from the bottom of my heart. I love Ridley Scott. And I really do. But Gods of Egypt was the most smack in the face kind of story to both ancient Egyptology and Sense and Sensibility, speaking of classic literature, that I have ever seen, because it didn't just bastardize the story, it completely rewrote everything into this ridiculous, I can't even say that even the like the small parts of the gods stories were beneficial. They weren't. They were terrible. They didn't
Yeah.
even make sense most of the time. And again, I think that's where the problem is. The problem is not in telling a story that has been told and retold, because Beowulf is a great example. But you can't tell and retell a story and think that you're a better storyteller than the original story was,
Hmm.
because then why are you doing the adaptation? Why not just write your own original story and just add some tropes in there,
Yeah.
make it feel a little like that, that kind of thing. Um Josh, I have to ask you,
Hmm.
so have you ever seen Lord of the Flies?
Not all the way through, no.
Okay, Tori, have you seen Lord of the Flies?
Yes.
That movie actually scared me as a child.
Yeah.
That was really
But
scary.
the book is so much better. Like it's just so much better in so many ways.
It's true, and I think we can discuss ad nauseum. I think the reason that books are so sorry books, but books are actually, I think, superior to movies in a lot of ways, because we have inner monologue, we have descriptions of settings that can go on for pages and pages and pages, and in movies we just don't have that time. The format is concise, and we have to be very clear about what we're telling inside of movies, or we
Hmm.
lose half of the audience. So I totally agree with you. But the reason that I ask about Lord of the Flies is because that's one of those classic adaptations that I think introduced a group, well, it introduced generations to a piece of literature that I don't think that people may have read before, because it has that sense of it feels rebellious, it feels angsty, it feels like there's something
Yeah.
here to identify with. And okay, so that brings me to my sort of last question for you guys, which is, have you ever seen a movie that made you read a book, a movie specifically that was related to classic literature that made you go, oh yeah, okay, I got to read this book?
Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And 20 Leagues Under the Sea, too.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is an
Yeah.
awesome one.
Yeah.
I also, Jules Verne was such an awesome writer.
Oh, he was.
Okay, what about you, Josh?
Yes, of Mice and Men.
Of Mice and Men.
Yes,
And
the version, I believe, was 1992, directed by Gary Sinise, starring him and John Malkovich. It's the
the
first
newer one.
time I recall openly weeping at a movie.
Oh.
I was like 12 when I saw it. That
I
messed me up,
for
man.
for a few years, I homeschooled one of my kids, and that was one of the books that was on our literature rotation. And after my kid read that book, they came out to me in the living room, and I'll never forget the look on their face. And they said, "Why did you make me read that?" And it was like their whole body was just absolutely in anguish over it. So, yeah, I feel that. I totally feel that. Um, the movie that I watched that I hadn't read, and I'm so glad that I did, was Vanity Fair.
Okay.
Um, Vanity Fair. I didn't even actually know that Vanity Fair was a book. I should have, but I didn't. And I read it, and oh wait, I've got one more. And I loved it. The other one was Love in the Time of Cholera. I went to go see Love in the Time of Cholera as a movie, and it is the saddest story. Oh my god, it's absolutely sad. But the love story at the center of it really captured me, and the surrounding the this idea of them being both altruistic and hiding things from each other so much was just such an awesome backdrop for a story. It was absolutely wonderful. Highly suggest it. Um, okay, so classic literature, food wise, Tori, what kind of food do you think matches any of the movies that we just talked about? And let me ask you, if you had to have some food for, let's say we were going to do uh, a book club by watching a movie, um, what would you pick? So, what's the food, and then what movie are you bringing to our book club?
I'm going to go with Kesher and the Y, and I'm going to go with some bourbon and a cigar.
Oh, all right. So, okay, so we're talking J.D. Salinger, right?
Hmm.
And the movie Catcher in the Rye that you want to watch is the one that was made in, it was made in the 60s, right? Wasn't that movie made in the 60s?
Yeah, I think so.
Um, I'm almost positive that that was a 60s movie. Okay, so we're having cigars, we're having bourbon. Josh, what are you bringing, and what movie are we watching for our book club here?
Well, the movie is going to be Of Mice and Men, because who doesn't love a grown man openly weeping?
Yes.
And the food that I will be bringing along, even though I've never had it, it just seems appropriate. Rabbit stew.
Hmm.
That is, I think, a really good choice, and totally fits 100% in with our setting. So awesome. Good job. Um, so if I had to choose a movie to bring to our movie book club, I am going to make you all very sad. Because I'm going to make you sit through Moby Dick,
Oh. Oh.
and it's long. It's very long, but I love that story so much. Ahab is one of my favorite fictional characters.
Oh.
Um, so complicated and yet so underappreciated. I mean, obviously Ishmael is everywhere, but Ahab as just is so complicated. I really love the story. And I absolutely love the story. I love the idea that the whale at the center of all of this is like it's the perfect metaphor for anything that you chase. Every time that you are chasing something, if you think that your passion level is Ahab level of chasing after Moby Dick, then you know you got a problem. But anyway, I love that story. Um, and so to this, okay, and this is what I was saying before. We attempted to create something called hardtack. It's what sailors used to eat aboard ships, and it's really terrible. We discovered that there is really no good way to make hardtack. I feel very bad for the sailors. We drank lemon water the night that we did this whole thing because that's what they used to do, right? They had the only citrus that they could bring on board to keep themselves from getting scurvy were basically lemons. I don't really think they actually had oranges. It was mostly lemons and limes, and they would basically cook them down and make this like pottage, like a lemon water, or lime water. In fact, there's terminologies around that about being a limey, and those kind. There's a whole bunch of jargon that's attached to just their need not to get scurvy. But the hardtack it was really difficult to actually make. You have to dry this stuff out, and then it will last forever. It is, but it tastes like it will last forever. It's hard to chew, it's awful. Okay, so then the next day we discovered that they also made these dried beef and um dried animal kind of cubes it's basically just like dried jerky, and you add seasoning in with it, and you let it cure and cure and cure and cure, and you carry that around with you. And they would do this on ships to make like the base for stews. So it's going to be really gross. You're going to be really bored by the movie, but that's my choice. Moby Dick, hardtack, and some kind of jerky that we reconstitute into a stew. Man, this is not going to be a good night for anybody. I'm so sorry. Maybe it'll be really
The
good
bourbon will
if you
help.
if you head over to Tori's table and you get bourbon and a cigar. That might help you to get through Moby
Yep.
Dick. I don't know.
Yep.
We'll see.
Well, we'll be sloshed by the end of it. We'll be like, yeah, the whale won.
Okay. I want to thank Josh and thank Tori. Tori, how can we find you on social media and tell us about all your other projects coming up?
Okay, so you can find me on social media at Tori Rush on Facebook and at Rush Tori on Instagram. I still haven't figured out how to change my Instagram name because it was being retarded, but I will figure it out. You can also get me on my show on Friday nights. I do it on Facebook Live, and then we have it on YouTube. Um, it's called The Infectious Geek, and this week we're doing censorship. So,
Mm,
yeah, tune in tomorrow at 9 p.m. on my Facebook. And if you're not friends with me, get to be friends with me. Just send me a friend request. And then you can also get me on Tuesday nights, pilot season, where we review pilot episodes of TV shows, which is awesome. And then you can get me here every week on the movie Potluck.
awesome. Tori, you're a very busy woman.
Yes, I am.
Very busy. All right, Josh. And how can we find you other than the awesome and benevolent producer behind the scenes of the movie Potluck? How can we find you?
Well, I wish I had an easy peasy graphic to throw up to, you know, show everything that I do. But unfortunately, it was kind of a last minute thing. And
We
oh
need a
wait,
flow chart. We need a flow chart for Josh.
But wait, there's more.
so I will say you can always follow me on Twitter at skidcomic, and you can go to wadcomedia.com. That is a thing. It's a working website. I'm not going to say much more than that, other than it's operational. Or you can go to thewadcast.com to find out more about the Wadcast, which airs on Facebook at the Wadcast every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. And we're kind of straying away from the formula of having a topic to talk about and getting more into a what's relevant kind of thing going on. Although I'll be
Nice.
the first to say we have yet to talk about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Well, that I feel like that's actually a really strong reason to tune in because it's saturated every place else. You have the Wadcast as your oasis. So, good job. Good job, guys.
Thank you.
And you can find me over at moviesandmeals.com. I will post, although I don't recommend making it, but I will post the recipe that we used to make hardtack. You can look at it, but we ate it for you, so you didn't have to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Kente. We have to say hi to Kente.
Also, yes, hi, Kente. And okay, just real quick, Josh,
Yep.
tell us about. First of all, I have to ask this because I feel like this is really important.
Okay.
Tell us about stuff that's coming up on the Wadcast, because I thought that you guys were going to do some kind of epic smackdown between Marvel and DC.
What? There's not really much of a fight there. Marvel takes DC and dunks its head in the toilet, flushes a few times.
I feel like this could be a great podcast.
I could do that. I could do that topic next week. We can do that.
Just
we'll get some Zack Snyder fans in here. Yeah, okay.
I know two perfect people to be on the show, so great. This is great.
Well, next week on our show, on the movie Potluck, we are going to do food everywhere. So we're going to be talking about, not ironically, movies that deal that have the central theme of food.
Like,
and I don't
do the Giant Peach.
Yes, that's a perfect one, James and the Giant Peach. I swear, if anybody brings the movie Eat, Pray, Love, I will throw you off, and we'll never talk again. No, I'm just joking. I feel like there are so many awesome movies out there that deal sort of with the central idea of food, including movies that have restaurants in the central theme, movies that My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I mean, there are so many movies out there that really look at food as a part of the actual narrative. They're almost characters by themselves. So I hope that we come up with really great ideas for next week.
Oh, I have an idea.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm super excited. So with that, and hopefully by that time Betty can join us, and she can give us some insight into how awesome the cooking in Europe is. Betty, if you're listening, please at least send in some kind of idea for your best Scottish movie / recipe. I can't wait to see what that is going to be. With that, I will see you all next week. Thank you for joining us. Josh, thank you. Tori, thank you. Everyone, thank you.